Hello, hello, hello. It's me immense pleasure to welcome you all here today to VoiceBox at the Times and Sunday Times Literature Festival. And we're going to be talking about how to get published. And I'd just like to give a thank you at the beginning to Brazen, who have sponsored this event. Brazen is a new imprint set up by Romilly Morgan, which specialises in publishing books to embolden, and is a hotbed of stories and voices which speak to a new generation of readers. So thank you very much, Brazen. So first of all, let me start off by introducing our panellists today. So we've got with us Sophia Thakur, who is an award-winning performance poet and author of the incredible collection, Somebody Give This Heart a Pen, which stylists described as uplifting, brave, and quite devastating. She also authored the children's book Superheroes, inspiring stories of secret and strength, and she's working very excitingly on her next poetry collection, which is going to be publishing next year. And then we have with us Katherine Ormerod, author of Why Social Media is Ruining Your Life, a no-holds-barred look at what social media is doing to us as a society. Pandora Sykes called it a vital manual to help you navigate social media and turn it not into a weapon, but also a useful tool. And Katherine is a brand consultant and also a prolific ghostwriter. So she's going to be talking to us about that today as well. And last but not least, myself, hello, I'm Abigail. I am a literary agent, but I also founded a publishing consultancy called Bergstrom Studio. And Bergstrom Studio is a 360 consultancy, basically helping emerging writers find their voice and get aspiring authors published. So we offer all sorts of editorial services, and we're also a hybrid literary agency. And I've also got my debut novel, What a Shame, publishing in February, so can speak to the author side of things as well. So yeah, with the introductions done, it's really, really great to be here. I'm really hoping that we can answer your questions, demystify publishing, and yeah, just have a really open conversation. So I will kickstart by, Katherine, let's start with you.
Right.
Yeah. So can you tell everyone here about your route to getting on the publishing ladder and how kind of why social media is ruining your life?
Of course.
Out into the world.
It's still a shock to me that I'm a published author. Hasn't sunk in. It's been years. It definitely was something that I presumed was a long way off in my career. I started off as a journalist. I worked on fashion desks, Sunday Times Style, Grazia, Glamour magazine, and went a very, I guess, traditional route back then. I did a master's degree in fashion history after a history degree at Edinburgh. And I just, I started right from the bottom. I was a stylist assistant and got my foot in through the door and started writing little bits front of book copy, which is, those first pages that you look in a magazine and it's like, go and see the Serpentine Gallery or whatever, wear these shoes. Anyway, so that's how I started writing. And honestly, I was never 100% sure I'd made the right decision, if it was the career for me. For years and years and years, I thought I was going to be a barrister. And I'd gone to university to go and do a history degree and then do a law conversion. That was always like the big plan. And then I started working at Harvey Nichols and St Andrew's Square in Edinburgh, and it all went wrong. Phoebe Philo and Stella McCartney were at Chloe. I think that explains everything. It was all over. Anyway, so I ended up working in all these magazines, and at the beginning of journalism, like I had to do all sorts of very strange things. Like I was a showbiz celebrity reporter for a year, which meant that I'd be in clubs. Like you'd get there at about 11 o'clock. Obviously, I would finish work at 7 o'clock. I'd often go to the cinema and then turn up at the club at 11 p.m. and try and get a quote from Cheryl Tweedy's mum. It definitely wasn't what I got my master's degree for. But, there were stories, and that's really what it's all about, isn't it? The stories. Anyway, so by the by, everything changed in publishing for magazines and newspapers, and I decided that it was time to jump ship. And I was desperate to set something up for myself, but I felt somewhat awkward because I was 28, 29, and I was, at the time, all the blogs seemed to be especially of the women I knew, pictures of girls wearing clothes, outfits of the day, all of that situation. And I was like, this is too cringe. Amazingly, now I take a lot of pictures of myself. But at the time, I was really uncomfortable with the idea and still saw myself as, a journalist. So I set up basically a platform where I started talking to all the people that I'd met in my career, from models to social media influencers and actresses, about the other sides of their lives. Because the thing that we always used to say to each other while we were working in this industry is, if only people knew. Like everyone was going through the same problems. It all boiled down to bad men, bad relationships, bad situations with self-esteem, all of that. And I was like, it's time that we all started sharing this, especially in the digital world, which have become very one-dimensional, these beautiful, perfect pictures. And what came of it, all of these interviews, 20, 30 of them, it all started to boil down to this one same problem that women were having with comparison and social media, and how digital culture was changing their opinion of themselves and opinion of each other. And I was like, there's something here. Anyway, I get an email in my inbox from Abby, who was like, I've read some of your writing and I think you've got, a book in here. And I was like, is this to the right person? I hadn't considered that there would maybe be that. I was like, maybe there could be an anthology in the future where I could help write for someone else.
And I think that's an important point, because I think sometimes you feel that what you want to write about, there's no point in me starting a blog, no one's going to read it, there's no point in me putting that out there, no one's going to care. But actually, agents are looking and they are reading and they're looking for people to write on the subject matter that you want to write about. So it's a good way to...
Exactly. And, I was like, who's going to read my blog? I launched it to a bit of fanfare, to be fair, because I knew lots of the people that I'd interviewed had big social media followings and they posted it.
Yeah.
So obviously, there was some currency behind it, but I received over 1,000 emails in a week.
Oh my gosh.
From people that had read it. And also, what I didn't mention is I wrote a lot of my own personal stories on there. So my voice was definitely, the imprint of it was on there, but I almost had covered myself with the other people, it's about them. And there's these few things that I've written.
It's a bit about me.
It's a bit about me, but maybe you'll happen upon it and it won't be too embarrassing. And it transpired that the things that I'd written ended up getting exponentially more views than the things that I'd written about other people, which was a huge confidence boost and a bit of an eye-opener, because, I think often lots of us are in careers where our skills and talents aren't necessarily appreciated, and maybe we've been put down by the people that are above us, or else there haven't been opportunities for us to really explore our talents or showcase them because people have put you in a box, or, just for whatever reasons. There are a million reasons, dynamics within, a team of 15 women and you're the middle youngest one or whatever. There hadn't really been an opportunity for my voice to be expressed, even though I'd been a journalist for 8 years, which is, I don't know, people would never think that, I think. Anyway, so it was a platform, and that's where it came from. And after our conversations, I was like, I feel like there's something here, and we kind of nailed it down. And then we got a commission offer, and I started writing it and released it, published it, and it was an amazing success. It really was. And I was on, ITV, Good Morning TV, and all of that kind of stuff. It was a really big thing. Page 2 of the Telegraph on the week that it came out. I had over 1 million digital imprints for all of the different articles that I wrote around every single magazine that I've ever wanted to be involved in. I wrote something for. That's kind of a big deal. I'd had a baby just before I finished. I think that we had a call for the final chapter, and I was like, oh, I'm in labour. And then I had to finish it, and I actually found the post experience, I was actually very emotionally vulnerable. I found it very, very difficult to put myself out there, and there were a lot of really personal stories in the book, which in the cold light of day, seeing written out there and poured upon by all your peers and everyone that knows you when you're in the real depth depths of trying to, navigate a new thing in your life. It's really overwhelming. And there's also a lot of work that you have to do for free when your book comes out, which no one kind of mentions to you.
But I'm going to stop you there. Just
sorry, I'm really going.
No,
but we've got time, right? We've got time.
Just so we can do it in chronological order, just so you guys are like, okay, what happens next? So, Sophia, do you want to talk about how you got to how your book came to be published? Because your experience was quite different in the sense that you didn't have an agent. I guess the thing to say is most publishing houses will only won't receive unsolicited submissions. So it's the commissioning editor's jobs to build relationships with the agents. And so you find the agent that if you're a crime editor, you find the agent that finds all the really good crime stories, and thus with cookbooks and the next contemporary big feminist fiction or what have you. So really, in the first instance, my advice is always find an agent. But I am an agent, so I would say that. And we will get to talking about the other routes in. But Sophia, your route was slightly different, right?
Yeah, I'm so wrapped up in your story. I'm like, wow, it's like an evening with. It's great.
Sorry, I don't know how it happens. I start, and this is a new skill.
Because you're a good storyteller. That's what it's about, human stories.
Yeah.
Go on, we'll go.
It's not even nearly as interesting. So I was performing once. No, so I didn't have an agent. I didn't even have a manager, actually, when I was performing. So my first trade is performance poetry. And when you're self-managing, it's very difficult to put your trust, I guess, in someone to kind of represent exactly what you feel and what you want the book or the product or even the performance to do. So I never even thought I needed one. To be honest, at the time, if someone had said, I want you to have an agent, I would have been like, yeah, okay. Didn't know what an agent did, didn't have a clue, didn't know what they were meant to do, didn't know what it could have added into my whole journey. Now, however, I'm on Abby's side. Definitely get an agent. But so my route in, I was performing poetry, and a publishing house, Walkers, who published like Where's Wally and quite a few other quite big children's books, they were releasing a book called The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, and they said we want spoken word as part of the brand campaign. So I said, okay, cool, I can do some poetry. So I created this piece of poetry. They really liked it. And then a year on, they said, we want to do a celebration and drinks for the book. And I said, oh, amazing, I'd love to perform. And actually, I think what's important to note there is it was the first time I had asked someone if I could come and perform in that place. And they were like, yeah, absolutely, we loved the poem. So I came, I said hello to Angie and her mum, and I performed. And I was sat down with a bunch of other people in the venue, and I don't actually know what role Jane plays in Walkers.
She's a publisher. Yeah, she's a senior publisher. She kind of heads up the editorial teams, and she's involved. Yeah.
It's like the big boss, like Bowser, but really nice Bowser.
Publishers like
Bowser, great, really lovely Jane. She came up to me and she was like, "Tell me you've got a collection in the works." And obviously, I'm just graduated, 20 years old. There was no version of that where I would say, "Yeah, no, I don't actually." I said, "Yeah, of course I've got a collection going on." I had absolutely nothing. I had just changed my Instagram bio to writer, actually, from performer. So to me, that was the extent of my writing career. So I was like, yeah, I've got a whole body of work. And she was like, amazing, send me a proposal. And I was like, you've got it, sis. So I called everyone and I was like, what's a proposal? What on earth is a proposal for a poetry collection? And also, at this point in time, I hadn't read a poetry collection before. My whole world had been performance poetry. So if you told me, we want you to do a spoken word album, or we want you to do a feature on a song, I'm with you there. Write a poetry collection, I'm not sure where to start there. So I was like, a proposal, got you. She was like, when can you get it done? And in my head, I'm thinking, it can't be harder than a poem, right? It's the proposal. So I was like, as soon as you need. She was like, can you send it the next few weeks? I was like, yeah. So, so I called my friend Sully, who directed me to another woman. She was like, she works in literature, have a chat with her. So I met up with her, and she was like, a proposal was basically a quarter of the book. Get that down, get the reasons why you would be good to be published, the kind of work you've done in the past, and what you have plans for the book, basically, what you think the book can do once it lands in this space. So that weekend, I don't think I've focused that much since my dissertation. Probably more. My dissertation was a bit of a glitch, but I was so locked in, because obviously I had to write the poems, but then also had to convince them that this collection was something that I've been convinced on for the past year. I'd been convinced on it for about 5 days. I was so sure for 5 days. I put this collection together, beat out the poems, and then I sent it to them, and I had a conversation with my friend that I had spoken to that had given me the advice, and she was like, okay, expect between this much, this amount and this amount. And I was like, okay, cool. And then they came back and they were like, we love the idea, we want to offer you a 2-book deal. And I was like, oh, this is nice. This is nice. Something must have,
good.
But good.
Yeah.
Unexpected but good is exactly what it was. Unexpected but shocking, in fact, is what it was. So I said, I'm not too sure about a 2-book deal, but I'd love to go with the one. And they were like, okay, cool.
Very cool of you.
I was like, yeah, sure. And I was like, okay, wicked. Then they set me a deadline based on the fact that I said I had already written the book. So this is when it came back round and bit me in the bum. So can I say that? Sorry. So once we got the paper signed, when you're a freelance performer, you know to not start anything until you sign the papers, because anything can happen up until that point. So I didn't start anything, but all the while they're in acquisitions, they're pitching the title, they're doing everything, and I'm just there kind of like, it's not real.
Really common in publishing with contracts. They take so long, months and months and months. It's awful.
I've written a book before we've signed a contract, haven't I?
Yeah.
The whole thing, the entire book.
Yeah.
For someone else, it's ghosting, but
So
we've got there.
It all starts.
It's a
That's
process.
quite a good
Yeah.
thing to say, I think, that if you're at that stage in conversations, then get going, get writing.
Yeah.
Don't pause.
Assume just because the money hasn't dropped, it's not happening, because the deadline is the deadline, is what I'd say.
Deadline is the deadline, and that's in the contract. But I think the interesting thing that you guys have both touched on there is vulnerability, in a sense, because, you, Katherine, even though you were interviewing other women who you thought your audience would be interested in, the stories that resonated most were your human ones. And for you, similarly, you weren't invited to come and read that. You were like, hi, can I come? And I think that's really, really hard. The hardest thing, I think, in the process of getting published is to be vulnerable and to put yourself out there. And I wanted to ask you guys if perhaps you had any tips, or what was your experience in kind of overcoming that vulnerability around your books and wanting to write them, and how did you overcome that? How did you find the discipline to sit down and write them?
I think, if I may, sorry.
Go for it, Dan. Go on.
I think there's a level of, not arrogance, but a level of audacity you have to adopt to believe that something you've created, everyone should read. It's almost like the Kanye complex, not to bring Kanye into this, not to bring him in, he brings himself into it, but there is a level of sheer audacity that you need to be able to say, actually, this is so important and it's had such an impact on me. It absolutely will change your life. And even if it won't do the thing of changing that person's life, you almost can't afford to step out with any less confidence. My collection is obviously a poetry collection, and I think I was going through a breakup at the time when I was rush writing. Such an intense period. I had like 3 months a breakup. The breakup was my focus, so I kind of had this canvas, I guess, to go through everything on, and to put those stories out, knowing that within the 9 months it's also going to be in print. And really, breakups take a while, right? Sometimes they take a year. We might still be talking when this book comes out. So, but then it is remembering that actually your story isn't for you the moment you've realised it's a story. Your story is something to offer back to someone who may benefit from that thing. Toni Morrison's got this idea that art introduces moral imagination back to people. And it's this idea that you can see a feeling or an emotion, you can feel a feeling or an emotion, and it's such a blur to you. It's just something you, in your autonomy, are experiencing and going through. But the moment you see it on a page or in a film or in a piece of art, you realise, actually, I'm not isolated in this. And from the point of knowing you're not isolated, you feel somewhat empowered to navigate through it. Even if it's not solve it, just navigate through it. Adele's song has just come out, and I'm like, sis, I feel you. I really take it easy on me. I was just 25, and that's exactly how I was feeling. And I think there's something so powerful about making someone else feel seen, to then in some ways pick up their own pen. Like, my book's called Somebody Give This Heart a Pen, and my main ambition in the poetry collection is that when kids read it or when adults read it, they see a part of their story they really resonate with. I remember I was doing an assembly, and I've got a poem in the book called Daddy's Accents, and it's a poem basically commenting on the fact that when my dad speaks on the phone, he's got his normal voice that we all hear, which is somewhat African, somewhat Asian, somewhat diaspora, I don't know. And then his actual work voice when he picks up the phone, and it's like, who's this guy on the phone right now? And I wrote this poem about it, and when I was writing it, I realised it was because his accent that he came and travelled with and that he's learnt life in is deemed unprofessional here. So he had to change it. And whilst I used to find it really funny, I realised, this might be a bit sad actually. But anyway, I wrote a poem on it and I read it in this assembly. And there was, I think it was majority English kids, and there was like a community of Asian kids in the audience. And a few of them had come up to me afterwards, and they were like, oh my goodness, my parents have these accent problems, this, that, the other. And then the head teachers emailed me a week or 2 weeks later and was just like, this thing has opened such a discourse about accents because we've been having bullying issues about kids and their accents not being able to say things. Wow. But the poem has enriched the fact that actually there's nothing dumb about not being able to say a word the same way that someone else says it. It just means you're bilingual, when actually I would love to be bilingual at the moment.
Yeah.
Just generally, to be fair, I just want to get out of this London and survive. But actually, there's a richness and there's a wealth to it, but until you unpick it, it's quite hard. So to not answer your question at all.
No, you have. No, but you have. And I think that's such a beautiful point, because the thing that I always get when I speak to people that are aspiring to be published authors is like, well, why would anyone care what I think? Why does anyone want to hear what I've got to say about that? And that's the fundamental, like, turn that question around. It's like, what is your unique perspective? What is your lived experience in this? What have you felt? What have you, because it will be shared. And if you can be vulnerable, and if you can share your human story, if you can be open about your experience, people will come to that, and they will see that authenticity, they will see that vulnerability, and they will meet you in it. And that is what makes successful books. And that's why we constantly have breakout successful memoirs from no one we ever heard of, you know? So it's never ever think that. Think, well, what have I got to offer that's different? Have you got anything to add, Catherine?
I think that I absolutely lacked that audacity when I wrote my first book, and I have it now. So I absolutely see that. And I think firstly it's because I was a journalist, and you're very much trained that you need to take yourself out of a story. That's the training of journalism. So the problem is, of course, we live in a different age now, and people want a lot of information about you as the writer. It's like the lens changed within my career, and just the feelings and almost embarrassment about talking about myself hadn't caught up with it. It's there now. Definitely, that was the feedback that I got from my editor all the time. Recenter yourself in this conversation. Stop using other people's voices to mask your own. And I think that's something that I really learnt through the process of writing that book. Now, I remember, though, when I had this book, I was like, it has to come out now. If it doesn't come out now, someone else is going to write this book. Whereas I have an idea for a book now, and I'm like, no one else can write this book. Because this book is written by Katherine Ormerod, and only I can write this book, and other people might talk about it. This isn't going to, break the internet. It's not brand new, blooming subject matter, but only I can write this book. It can only come from my voice, and that is the difference in confidence, for sure. I love that. And like, where do you get that from except for experience? You don't. You just have to keep writing and keep putting yourself out there and keep centering yourself in the narrative, and you will get to a place where you're no longer embarrassed but feel incredibly empowered by that.
Absolutely. Wow. Yeah, that's so interesting to have that direct comparison of that book and the one that you're working on now.
Wow.
Shall we have a little chat about kind of audience then, and who you're writing to? Because I think that's something as well that a lot of authors that we work with via the studio seem to grapple with and have a lot of questions around. When you're setting out to write your books, how much is the audience you're writing for a factor? Are you thinking about them? Are you writing to them? How important do you feel it is to pin that audience down? Or actually, are you writing what you love and what you want to put out there, and you're just thinking it will find its audience?
I think it's got to be a bit of both, hasn't it? Like, there are some things that I'm interested about, but probably the things I write about it should be confined to my iPhone notes. Then that's fine, But other times there are things that generally I think you have a good gauge when you talk to other people about things as well, and you know when something's starting to resonate. And I'm sure when you perform, you have these moments, like with this piece that you were discussing, that the reaction was so visceral and immediate that you're like, there's that moment, and I think it has to be a mixture of the two. Equally, I would continue to write were there not an audience. And I think that is something that I learned because I have a whole other career which makes much more money than this one. And when I first had my children, I just stopped writing because it was like, what, I'm going to pay childcare so I can do this. It was the economics of it were not, meeting up. So I stopped writing, and after about 9 months to a year, I was like a shadow of my former self. I'd lost my voice, my confidence, I felt lost in all senses of my career. And I was like, okay, and I have written a lot of things, lots and lots of things that I just didn't publish. So I think there's always space for you as a writer to write without an audience. And I think basically don't over rely on an audience. Continue writing, and something will resonate in a way which gives you a vigor to push it out there.
Absolutely.
I also, sorry, it was going crazy. That was so epic whilst you were speaking with the sirens. I was like, go on, sis, go on.
Vigor was the right word.
Rose with it. I thought, this is brilliant. The audience. Okay, so because my first thing that I do is performance, it takes a different level of audacity to not consider your audience when you're performing for them. It's somewhat a bit mean, actually. So I think I'm definitely trained in the verse of performing to whoever I'm speaking to. So, for example, I do a lot of work in the race space, and I do a lot of the race work that I do in the corporate space. And a lot of the corporate is middle-aged, wealthy, white, male, most of the time, is my audience. And that means the approach I take with them and how I want them to receive what I'm saying is very different to how I might talk to Abby, for example. So I think if you do believe that you want your message to land, I think it's safe to consider your entry point. Take my dad as an example. If I want to get something out of my dad, I can't. If I'm angry or upset with my father, I'm a father.
Came out there, didn't it?
Know where,
angry and upset. He's my father.
Yeah, he's not my daddy anymore. No. If I need to get something out of him, I can't do it shouting because the only thing he's going to hear is my raised voice, right? But if I pander to his sensitivities and daddy the situation, I know that that's his entry point, and it's a point of softness. So I think where a lot of my work is quite cause-based, where I don't necessarily want to change your mind, but I do want you to consider the way that you're thinking about a certain thing. And where I really believe that, or I really want you to do that to encourage empathy, I can't afford to come at it speaking at you. I really need to have a conversation with you. I need to understand who you are, how you receive information. And I guess it goes back to the question, who is your audience? And I know that when I'm speaking in corporate, my audience is people who perhaps have never come across a black person before, but only see us on the news. And I know that there's a certain wall that I need to dispel. If I'm speaking to young girls about self-confidence or self-esteem, I know that my entry point, I'm fighting a backlog of Instagram. I'm fighting a backlog of TikTok trends, whatever it might be. So I need to penetrate that for them to hear what I'm saying. So I think consider your audience as much as you consider your impact, but then in that same breath, decide whether you want to be an activist or just someone who there's a poem by a Palestinian writer, and she basically says, we can't afford to write about flowers because the world around us is burning. And I think if you decide to be an activist, you can almost only consider your entry point, because you might not be able to afford being angry. Realistically, what your entry point might be pure grace. But then if what you want to write about is romance or love or something that perhaps doesn't demand a complete change in behaviour, absolutely enjoy what you write, because there is nothing more soul destroying than receiving compliments on the work that you do and you've hated doing it. It becomes obsolete. Like it really feels like it's not worth it. Unless the reason you go into it is because you just want an applause, then, fine.
Or a paycheck.
Or a paycheck. Yeah,
there's
exactly.
Girls got to eat.
Exactly. And you know what? I've done some things in my time, okay? I've done some shows in my time that are questionable, because at the end of the day, I've got material needs. But in terms of the things that hopefully will last longer than I do, I definitely grappled with audience, because I started doing poetry at a time where social media wasn't a part of your career plan at all. And then suddenly, over the space of like 3 years of performing, I need a hashtag. It's like, what? Now I don't fully know how to epitomize or like optimize a hashtag. But what I realized, especially at the beginning of lockdown, was that I felt in order to be content, I had to create content, right? I had to create things that would almost validate my existence as a writer to you on social media. And the dangerous thing about that is the metric is engagement. And engagement isn't judged by the standard of your work. Engagement is judged by the algorithm a lot of the time. So it means that it is very easy to become disappointed in your own work because you think it's not good, but actually it's just not caught the curve.
Lowest common denominator. That's the reality, isn't it? It's we're not talking necessarily quality. We're talking about something that hits as many people as possible.
Yeah. And sometimes it can be the most powerful thing, right? Like your book, for example, almost against the grain, but became its own desert.
Yeah.
But in that same breath, it's difficult, like it is very, very, very difficult. So I think to actually answer the question, what I'd say is think about your audience to the point of impact, and almost not a second or a centimetre beyond that, because you deserve to enjoy what you do. You deserve to enjoy the product of what you create. It kind of goes back to something you said a second ago. There's a poet called Kareem Parkins Brown, and the best advice he ever gave me was that it's rarely about the content of your story, it's about how confident you are in telling your story. And a good storyteller can make this desk interesting. A good storyteller. I've got my middle brother, eccentric character. He will come into your room and tell you what actually is a really uninteresting story, but the charisma he carries in his storytelling, you're like, wow, tell me more about like the milk that went stale or something. But he really believes in it. So I think like in order to believe in what you do, you have to be fond of it. So
back yourself.
And you make the point as well. Like, I know many talented writers who they're journalists, they've done amazing work, and they are like, I can write a bestseller rom-com. I can definitely do it. And they manage to get it published because they're a name, and you read it and it is drivel. Because they've done it like painting by numbers.
Yeah.
They aren't passionate about it. They've thought, I can't work as a journalist anymore. I have to support my family. I need X amount of money. I'm, Sophie Kinsella or whatever, that next number 2 coming.
Yeah.
And it's rubbish.
Yeah.
And actually, I think if you're trying to do that painting by numbers, tailoring to an audience, tailoring to what you think people want, you always miss the mark.
Doesn't work.
You absolutely always miss your mark. So there has to be something that is wildly and deeply individual and just for you to make it original enough to be authentic.
Yeah.
And I think that's the answer, I think.
I think that brilliant answers, both of you. So should we circle back to social media? Because that's another question that I get asked all the time. Like, do I need to have a social media presence? And the reality is editors and publishers are getting more and more interested in it. It is a question that comes up. Do you have a platform? What is your platform? Who's showing up for it? But I'm not going to answer the question. I'm going to pose the question to you guys. How important is social media, and do you have any tips or advice in terms of building a community? And Katherine, I guess we'll start with you, given that you wrote a book about social media.
Yeah.
Please.
Okay, so I would say social media is as important as many other credentials.
Yeah.
So if you say that you worked for an amazing magazine and you're a lead columnist and multiple tens of thousands of people read that column every week, then you have a platform.
Yeah.
It's not on social media.
Yeah.
It's as important though.
Yeah.
What I would say is also the reality is for those of us that work in social media, we know that all social media isn't made the same. You could have 1 million followers on Instagram, but you wouldn't have the same level of support as, say, a smaller channel on YouTube because it's a younger, more engaged pool of people that are potentially involved in it, and they're probably going to want to buy your book more.
Yeah.
So when we're actually talking about the way these numbers translate into potential readers of books, a follower isn't a follower.
No, and sometimes it's way better. Like, I don't know if you want to write about rewilding, for example, and so you start writing about that on a blog, and you're just posting your rewilding, what you're planting, what's happening. Blah, blah, blah. Even that community that's there is really going to be there for that subject, and they're really showing up to have that conversation with you. You don't have to have 100,000 followers to write a book. In that community, that smaller community is more engaged and more valuable to you.
Yeah, because they care about you. They're like entrenched in the narrative. They're not just turning up and going, nice shoes, see you, or nice hat, see you. You know, it's like they are invested in your story.
Yeah.
And those are two very different things. And I have 2 Instagram accounts, one which doesn't get much love these days, but it was about parenting. And it had 8,000 followers, something like that. And I have a bigger account which has got 65, whatever. Anyway, so much more. And I would often get the same amount of likes on the motherhood parenting account that I did on the main account, but exponentially more comments.
Yeah.
Exponentially more messages, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, because the way that I talked about parenthood was so raw and so open and connected in a way. And I became like a local celebrity in my area because there were so many people that had picked it up from the local classes that I went to, etc. And I'd been a fashion journalist and a social media worker. That sounds wrong somehow. Anyway, social media worker.
It was the worker part, yeah.
Yeah,
Social media
worker.
specialist?
It was the S in the worker.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, but for 15 years, you know, and lived in the same place, but I started getting stopped on the street all the time. I'd go into Gales and there'd be someone be like, so the impact, I know in a real life sense, the impact of that social media following was so dramatically different from the one which actually the rest of my career has been built on. So I think don't worry so much about the numbers. Worry about creating a true involved community that's based in something that's real and shared and not just flickable.
Yeah.
So I think that would be my take.
That's such a good answer.
Yeah, I'm learning a lot because should you see my social media, it's just chaos and not that great. Again, do you know what I was saying this to one of the girls we were talking to somewhere else in the festival, that I tweeted once ages ago that I want to build my career to a point where I don't need social media, but it is slapping me in the face left, right and centre that I don't know if that exists anymore. I don't know if a version of that career exists anymore.
Well, look, we're talking about Adele. She launched her thing all on social media.
See, I like
YouTube
Adele's style.
Exactly, but she did Instagram Live for her first thing.
But
she
barely,
needed. I know, but she needed a
even
social
Adele
media.
Needed it, you're right. If I could get away with doing what Adele did, one Instagram Live before one release every 5 years, believe me, I would do it, but I haven't got the Adele.
I think we all would.
Anything. Yeah, right, exactly. I think similar things on the engagement. I think what I'm learning at the moment is understand, do you know what? So I was in Fahiti in Turkey not too long ago, and long ago before the pandemic. And I read this poem to a friend of mine who was also out there at the time, and the poem was in the voice of a mother who has just become pregnant. And it was from a few of my friends are pregnant at the time, so I was soaking them for inspiration for my next collection. And the poem is basically about that journey, about making your whole body a country, basically, for a newborn. And I read it to him, and his reaction was just soul crushing. He was just like, oh, okay. And I just thought, oh, okay. Okay, sure. But then he said to me, I hope you're not building your confidence on the opinions of people who aren't your audience. And I will never forget that as a piece of advice. And what it made me realise is when I get upset when I post a poem on Instagram and no one, not even my siblings, respond or like it. Like no one. It's just literally like the bare minimum of likes. Literally like the desertest of the deserts. No one responds, but then I post a selfie, post a picture in a nice tight little dress or some heels, and oh my gosh, I'm an influencer. It's soul destroying because it's not what you on Instagram. But I realised actually my audience is for that, is what I realised. The vast majority, like the 10% who actually see your post on Instagram, or the 20%, for me, a lot of them were people that didn't necessarily come for my poetry.
Yeah.
They came for something else. And it wasn't until I started pushing a lot more poetry things on my Instagram, my audience changed a bit. Am I saying that I get more engagement on my poems? No, I'm still work in progress, but I'm also learning to, in some ways, not decenter myself from social media, but I guess reframe. I think we had a conversation about it as well. I was basically saying, I hate social media, I don't want to be an influencer. And Abby gave some really good advice that I've really held true to. She said that you perhaps wouldn't hate it or despise it if you knew exactly what you wanted to use it for. And it's true, because if I'm releasing a book, I know what I want to do and I don't hate social media. If I'm idle and just procrastinating over a book proposal, for example, hate social media. Worst thing in the world. So I think not to give advice, but what I would, in terms of making your peace with social media and using it and soaking it for its actual power, discover what its purpose is for your career and align yourself akin and as such, because even if it's not an essential part of what you need to do, the opportunity that comes from social media is completely undeniable. You know, brand partnerships are something that are quite new in the author space, I think, I would say, over the past maybe like 5-6 years or whatever. And I think that's come from social media, which means that your money is directly impacted by your engagement is a direct fruit of your, you know what I'm trying to say. Impact, money, what you do, engagement, basically.
We've got a Venn
It's a good trilogy,
Something in the middle.
Yeah, they all feed into each other. So I'd say work out how you want to use it. Don't make it something that you become anxious or depressed over, because it's far too easy to get into that space.
Yeah. Great answers, thank you. Well, I thought now we could probably, there's so much more to say and talk about, and I know these guys have got so much more to say, but I'm really hoping that there's going to be questions, and I'm guessing some of you have come along because you genuinely want to know how to get published, and there's definitely way too much to talk about and things that we've missed. So if you have got a question, you can just raise your hand, and Anna will kindly bring a microphone over. Who's going to be the first one? Yes, Guy. Yeah. Thank you.
I sort of had two questions, really.
Great.
You talked very nicely about how an agent was a real difference. But that you didn't realise you needed one. So what is it that they do for you that has made that difference? What's the, say, three things that they've done that you never realised you needed them to do?
3 things. Okay, try and catch them in my ramble. I'll hopefully hit 3. I think the first thing is are you a writer? Are you wanting to write?
I'm just interested.
Okay. So, technical. Okay. So there's, I think what I'm learning is it's really important for your publishers to only see you as a writer. Even if you are your own accountant, or you handle your own everything that is not writing, there is a level of peace that they bring you and you bring them when all you have to do is write. I think the moment you put yourself in the negotiation room, where actually you're arguing with your publishers, like, I deserve actually £4 more than what you're giving me, it does. We can't act like the conversation didn't happen once we've signed the contract. And there is so much to say for the peace that you want between a publisher and an agent and yourself as you're writing the book. You don't want to ruin your writing experience, because you just won't enjoy it, and it's not worth it if it's a fruit of yourself. So I think in maintaining that respectable distance is really, really, really great. We were talking about it earlier in terms of the nitty-gritty conversations. Sometimes your publishers don't exactly know what's best for your book. So if my publisher is great with distribution into a certain space and my topic is geology and they try and tell me what I should say about a cactus, I need my agent to have that conversation, because if I have it, we might have some problems. So I think keeping that respectability and that charm, or protecting that piece, is really important for an agent, or for a writer. I think the second thing is negotiating your best deal. There are copious amounts of situations or a plethora of experiences from people where they have been dealt the worst possible hand. There was a great hashtag that came out on Twitter, I think it was paid in publishing, something like that, where it basically exposed what people were being paid in advances, and people that may have had a first book that perhaps didn't do very well, they would get a second chance book and their advance was like way in the six figures. Someone else who had a bestseller, but because they didn't know what people were actually getting as the going rate for really good books, their second book was maybe like a few grand. And the difference is life-changing. So when this hashtag came out, it was like, wow, the publishing industry has a lot to answer for, but your agent knows about it. Your agent knows what else is happening on the palette. So protecting you, so giving you peace, protecting you, kind of like a good relationship, a good husband, giving you the peace, protecting you. And I think as a writer, you'll have people that hopefully enjoy what you do just in your life, whether it's your family or friends. But having someone who appreciates what you do to the point of believing this company here should back it, the confidence that then gives you to put back into your work, and I guess the audacity that you then decide to walk with after that, it's priceless, because they empower you by their belief in you. And I think those are my final three. I think I'm happy with them.
I'm watching your press, and how do you feel? Do you feel you an agent?
Yeah, I think that's bang on the money. I think the editor-writer relationship is so sacred, and it needs to be a creative one. And I think once those complications come in, and there's sticky conversations about covers that sales fall in love with, and Waterstones have signed off on, but the author hates it, and it can get really difficult. And I think it's the agent responsibility to do that. You know, it's the agent's job, absolutely, to have an understanding of the marketplace, the value, what's selling, at what level, who's buying what. I mean, that is a job. And also as an agent, you know, I spend so much of my time building relationships with all of these commissioning editors, and it's my job to know them and what they like and what they're commissioning and what they care about, and, you know, even the personal details can inform me of who I should submit to. So I think that knowledge pays off in terms of finding the right home, the right publishing home, which is really important. And I also think strategy. I think that's something that I pride myself on as an agent. It's not just thinking, okay, you can do this now. It's strategizing what is next. Like, where do you sit in this space as a writer now? Where do you want to get to? Like, when people think of you, what's going to be the one line they say? Oh, you know, the guy who writes X, or the girl that does Y. It's like, you need to know what you want to be known for, what books, what umbrella your books are going to sit under, in order to kind of build that brand and that resistance, because there's so much out there, there's so much noise. Like, to cut through, it needs to be solid. So I think your agent, you know, has those conversations with you and takes the time to...
Can I touch social media side?
Huh?
Social media side.
In what sense? In the
publisher putting it out, that's part of the strategy,
So the publishing house have a marketing, like a book publicist and a marketeer. So they do all of that side. But yeah, I definitely think I feed in ideas, and it depends where the author's at. I mean, somebody like Katherine, teaching Suck Egg, she could probably tell me a lot more about social media. Whereas other authors that are starting off that have no idea, yes, I will sit down and talk to them about a strategy, and very much what I sort of said to Sophia, which is having a plan of what you're putting out there and understanding what your social media is about, what it's saying, and planning that. So you don't wake up and go, oh God, like, what I need to post, but I don't know what I need to post, and I should put something out there. That you have 4 key content pillars, and you understand what they are and how you're using them. So yeah, I do get involved in that, but not in the kind of PR marketing of the book is, and it's advice. It's kind of, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Has we got any more questions? Yeah. it's up to you.
How do you stay motivated to write? And when you get
Good question.
tired, like, how does it factor into your day practically? You've got your job, and then you come home, you think, I just want to chill out, I want to chill out. Sort of buckle down on what drives you.
Do you want to go or shall I go?
I might have to lie. What motivates me? A good deadline, a good brief deadline. Do you know what? I think before it became a paid job, and it was just writing for pleasure, I wrote a lot more. If I'm completely honest, I think there is something about it taking the place of a 9 to 5 that you almost treat it like a 9 to 5. You would be shocked. Ask a writer somewhere when the last time they really wrote was, and you would be shocked, I would say. But I think for me, when I do know that I need to write, and I'm just purely being procrastinating or being lazy, or I'm scared of addressing what I need to write about, which is also a very real thing. I try to read a lot about or explore different types of artistic mediums, whether it's dance, whether it's theatre, whether it's film, things that speak on the thing that I'm talking about. So at the moment, there's an idea that I really want to explore, or that I'm exploring at the moment, which is how when you fall in love with something or someone, the whole world shrinks into that exact moment. Like, what even is that? That to me is chemical, and I'm exploring it from a biological perspective, from a chemical perspective, from a scientific perspective, from a religious perspective, and then back to a romantic perspective. And because I really care about this, I'm consuming what different poets have said about this, what different religious texts have said about this, what biologists have said about the chemical of love. And once you're soaking in all of this, it's very hard to not write, because it pushes what's been at the bottom of your throat to the tip of your tongue. So I think it is finding things that kind of usher you out of yourself. That definitely gets me writing. But in terms of what motivates me, it's a deadline. But in terms of what allows me to enjoy what I'm doing, it's finding what other people's takes on that thing, is what I'd say.
I'm really, really disciplined, and it's not just because it's my personality. It is. When I was a journalist and I worked on a daily paper where you had to write, I was not the same as I am now. I would spend 10 till 3 messing around, crafting the first paragraph, go for a wee, everything. I do not procrastinate now. My margins of error in terms of being able to fulfill what I say I can do are so tight, because I've got an 8-month-old and a 3.5-year-old, and that is the reality. So if I say I'm working between 9 and 1, if I think, ooh, Daily Mail, no, get back to it. There is literally no error for margin. The problem that I have is my bandwidth is so narrow, and if I have ideas outside of that, oh my God, it's so frustrating, because you've got this idea inside you and you're like, well, what am I going to do? It's 11:30 p.m. at night. I've just finished this project that I'm being paid for. How am I going to find? You don't, and you lose ideas and you lose things. And over these early years of having a family, you have to let some things go, I think. And that's really difficult to admit, because what if they were my best ideas? What if I'm never going to have these ideas again? What if I'm not going to have the bandwidth to explore them for another 10 years? And but then you dial it back, take down the drama. You just have to, I think, be really gentle on yourself and admit to yourself how much time you have available in a healthy, balanced way that's not going to completely turn your family life or your relationship with yourself absolutely upside down, and reduce your expectations by that. Because not everyone can wake up at 3:30 in the morning and write their novel every day and still manage to do a 9 to 5 and look after kids. You read these things and you're like, what is wrong with me in comparison to these people? They're robots. And of course there are the Margaret Thatchers out there, but mine in my beauty sleep. I really do. 4 hours is not going to cut it. Absolutely no way.
No way.
So you have to give some things up, and I think that's the reality. Probably the best part of that is that it makes you fine-tune and prioritise your best ideas, the things that, as you say, they're on the tip of your tongue. You sit down with a new group of people and you can't stop talking about it. And I know this is going to sound ridiculous because I mentioned iPhone notes, but I write all the time. If I'm on the bus and suddenly the baby falls asleep, I can probably bang out 800 words on my iPhone notes, on the way down to Chiswick, and I'll be like this, And then you've at least got something to copy-paste into your Word doc, and it makes it so easy then you're not like going in cold. You've already got something, you've got the basis.
Have a baby.
It's not just have a baby. It's like there are windows when you can work in the middle of things, and they don't have to be like. Of course, it's frustrating and it takes so much more time and all of that. Yes, I could have sat down in a week and like bashed it out, and the proposal would be there. Instead, it's like taking me 3 months because I'm doing like 7 minutes on the tube before whatever.
There's nothing wrong with that, and I think sometimes that's good for creativity. It's like you said it's like it can stunt you sometimes if you set boundaries and timelines. Like, I'm somebody who did write a novel alongside a full-time job, and I was running an agency and leading a team, and it was intense. The only time that I had was the weekend, and I would just write for a few hours on a Saturday, and then when I realised what I was doing, when I realised I was writing a novel, that came later, I thought, okay, great. Well, if I can do X amount of words every Saturday, and I do that for this many Saturdays, by this day, I'll have a finished novel. I stopped writing. I didn't write for months. The second I put together this writing schedule, everything dried up because it was a creative space. It was just a place for me to be creative, and that was when anything decent was coming. And I think sometimes we put these boundaries or expectations on ourselves, and freeing yourself up to just be like, I'm not going to sit down now and go, right, I'm writing my best-selling novel, here goes, because what the fuck, that's just too much pressure. And just to sit and go, well, I'm just going to write for 3 hours every Saturday if I feel like it, and just see what comes, and just, it's such a long process, just let it happen gradually.
Can I also ask, do you find that your previous jobs, previous kind of lives, factor into what you write, or do you feel that you had a cut-off period where you just thought, I'm going to be a writer now in this style, and that's it, and there's no influence?
Oh my God! Like I'm nothing without my previous career. Yeah. It not that I was wonderful while I was doing it. I always think of myself as quite a mediocre journalist, and I don't think I'm being harsh. I think I'm just being realistic. To be honest, but it taught me everything about being concise, about keeping the audience, about saying things in a shorter way. Especially when I go through editing, all I'm doing is like too many words. We can make this clearer, we can make it simple. Cut, like imagining yourself. Yeah, brutal.
Yeah. Kill your darlings.
Kill your darlings, all of those things. And it's just like in me, deeply in me. And I think, maybe you've worked in marketing, or maybe you've worked in advertising, maybe you've worked in all of these different games, and you know what that means, that just bringing out the quality. And if I hadn't had that previous career and I'd just gone into writing, I'd be a completely different writer.
I think we've got another question over here. So given that you've answered that one, I'm just going to jump over here quickly for our last question.
Cheers. So I've been writing a book for about 10 years now. I'm a musician at heart, so I was writing music, and I tend to find you write music very quickly. It's very spontaneous, and it's still a finished product. And you show it to people and we go yay or nay, and that's it. So with writing, I kind of said to myself, I don't care how long this takes me to do. I don't care if it takes me to 65. So I very much went down that approach. And I suppose that there's artistic tendencies that you've spoken about with poetry and things like that, and a lot of the writing became very poetic, and grabbing my iPhone when I'm waiting outside for fish and chips and just writing something that comes and flies at you. And basically now I'm getting to the point of actually, I want to see this on paper. I'd love to see it published. I'd love to get to the end of it. I'm getting about 3/4 of the way through it. I've got about 20,000 words to write, and I've changed my approach. And I'm thinking, right, okay, on the way to work, I've got downtime, I'm driving, I've got my iPhone, and I dictate into my iPhone as I'm driving. And that's been great. Last week I wrote 2,000 words, which was before I hit you up on the thing. The question is, the other thing is, this is a fiction book, so I have no real feedback. I've put little bits out I've got to work out to put a little bit out, and I've let people read and go, yeah, that's good, or yeah, I like that, or surprise people. How do you keep the quality? Where do you get that belief, that self-belief that actually what you're doing is He's good.
We are running out of time, so one of you is going to have to answer that one very quickly.
Okay, it's a death stare that was.
I mean, I'm really happy to do that. I think, look, until someone that is going to commission it or be involved with editing it reads it, you're probably never going to know. That's the truth.
And feed it to a bunch of people as well, because one publisher, it's just
not
for
like
them,
just
you
your
know?
mates though. Like it has to be people that like know
What
what
they're
quality
talking about.
means, and like ultimately that's because they've read 10,000 books.
Yeah, and
You know?
everyone gets to a point where they're like, I hate this. What a waste of time.
Exactly.
And it's completely normal. You just
Yeah.
got to push through that pain barrier
Push
and keep
through it.
going, and you'll feel differently.
And remember, like what you have now is not what will end up in the book.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. Like it will change. It will evolve. It's going to turn into a collaboration. It's going to blossom into something else. So what you have here in front of you, that's not the only thing it's going to be.
Yeah.
You have to be open to that.
I'm now going to have to wrap up, otherwise I'm
Sorry.
in so much trouble. But thank you so much, Katherine and Sophia, and thank you so much for coming to see us.
Well done.
Well done.